I remember the exact moment I knew something was wrong. It was the morning of my 65th retirement party, and I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to get my tie straight. My hands wouldn't cooperate. They never do anymore. 38 years of working the line at Hargrove Steel will do that to a man's hands. Calluses thick as boot leather, knuckles that ache when the weather changes. I looked at those hands and I thought, these hands built something. I thought, tonight, the people I love are going to celebrate that. Friends, I was wrong about that. I was so wrong it almost broke me. My name is Gerald Watts. I spent 38 years as a floor supervisor at Hargrove Steel in Youngstown, Ohio. I'm 65 years old. And 3. My wife, Patricia, passed 4 years ago from a stroke. And the grief of that is something I carry quietly. The way you carry a stone in your shoe, you learn to walk around it, but it never fully stops hurting. After she died, I sold the house we'd raised our son in and moved into a smaller place on Birchwood Lane, 2 bedrooms, a back porch I like to sit on in the evenings, a garden Patricia would have loved if she'd had the chance to see it. My son is named Cody. He's 37. He married a woman named Renee 6 years ago, and she came with a family, her mother Diane, her father Clifton, her brother Marcus, and his wife. They are the kind of people who eat at restaurants with menus that don't list prices. They take vacations in places I've only seen in magazines. Clifton retired at 52 from something in finance that I never fully understood, and he has a way of looking at you just slightly past you, like you're a window and the view behind you is more interesting, that I tried not to take personally for a long time. I tried very hard, friends. When Patricia was alive, Cody called every Sunday. He came home for holidays. He was a good son, not perfect, but good. But after she passed, something shifted. At first I thought it was grief, and then I thought it was the distance. He and Renee had moved to Columbus, 2 hours away, not far but far enough. Then, slowly, I began to understand that it wasn't grief and it wasn't distance. It was Renee's world pulling him in like a current, and I was sure getting smaller in the rearview. I don't say that to make Renee a villain. She was never cruel to my face. She was just cold in the way that polite people can be cold, all the right words. None of the warmth. Anyway, my retirement. Cody called 3 weeks out and said he and Renee wanted to throw me a party. He said it like a question, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like something had already been decided. He said Renee's family would be there, some of my old work friends, a few neighbors. He said they'd use the banquet room at the Riverside Grill, which is a nice place downtown, the kind of place with tablecloths and candles. I told him I would have been happy with a backyard cookout. He laughed and said, "Dad, come on. 38 years. You deserve something real." I believed him. I wore my best suit, the navy one I'd bought for Cody and Renee's wedding, the one Patricia helped me pick out. I got a haircut the day before, and I even bought new shoes, which is something I almost never do, because the old ones were scuffed and I wanted to look like a man who had something to be proud of. I drove to the Riverside Grill that Friday evening with my chest full of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something like hope. The room was already filled when I arrived. There were maybe 30 people, some faces I recognized, some I didn't. My old foreman Ray was there, bless him, and my neighbor Dorothy and her husband Frank. Clifton and Diane were holding court near the bar, dressed like they were attending a charity auction. Marcus had his arm around his wife and they were laughing at something on his phone. Renee was moving through the room, the way she always does, efficient and bright-eyed, managing everything. And Cody was at the center of it all, my son, looking handsome and easy in a blazer I didn't recognize. He hugged me when I came in. He said, "You made it, old man." I remember thinking that was a strange thing to call me, but I let it go. The first hour was fine. Really, it was. People told old stories. Ray brought up the time I'd single-handedly rigged a workaround for a belt system failure that saved our quarter, and I laughed along with everyone else even though the telling lost some of the details. Dorothy gave me a card with a sweet note inside that I folded carefully into my breast pocket. I had a glass of wine, which I rarely drink, and I stood a little straighter than usual, and I thought, this is all right, this is good. Then they asked everyone to be seated, and the dinner started, and after the plates were cleared, Clifton stood up and tapped his glass. "All right, everyone," he said, and his voice had that quality certain men's voices have, the kind that quiets a room without asking. "We are here tonight to honor Gerald." He paused, and something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe, or the pleasure of having everyone's attention. 38 years on the floor. That is a long time to do the same thing. A little laughter from certain corners of the room. Not from Ray. Not from Dorothy. In honor of Gerald's retirement, Clifton continued, "The family has put together a little presentation." Marcus stood and dimmed the lights. There was a screen I hadn't noticed before, set up at the far end of the room. And then the slideshow started. And, friends, I want you to understand that, at first I thought I had misread it. I thought it was some kind of technical error, or a joke with a punchline I was about to understand. The first slide was a photograph of me from maybe 20 years ago, standing in the mill in my hard hat and safety vest. Fine. Normal. But the caption underneath read, "The man, the myth, the guy who never left." More laughter. Cody was grinning. The second slide was a photograph of a rocking chair, with my name on a little plaque on the back. The caption read, "Gerald's next career move." The third slide was a photograph of a pill organizer Monday through Sunday with the caption, "Finally, something to keep him busy." Each slide landed with a wave of laughter that grew louder, like the room was being warmed up for something. Renee was laughing. Marcus was laughing. Clifton had that look on his face, the one that isn't quite a smile, more like the satisfaction of a man watching something he built working exactly as designed. I sat very still. I know how to sit still. 38 years on a factory floor teaches you to absorb a lot without flinching, because you cannot flinch in front of your crew. So I sat still and I looked at the screen and I waited for it to be over. But it wasn't over. The final slide appeared, and when I saw it, something went quiet inside me, not peaceful quiet, but the quiet of a room after something breaks. It was a photograph of me, taken recently without my knowledge, sitting on my back porch in the evening. I was alone in the picture. I was looking at Patricia's garden. My shoulders were curved in a way that showed I didn't know anyone was watching. And the caption underneath read, "Don't worry, Gerald. Now you'll have plenty of time to sit here and wonder where it all went." The laughter in the room died a little unevenly on that one, and not everyone was sure that one was funny. Ray was not laughing. Dorothy had her hand over her mouth, but not from amusement. I stood up. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I needed to be standing. I picked up my napkin from my lap and I set it on the table very carefully, the way you set something down when you need your hands to be doing something purposeful. I looked at Cody. He was still smiling, but it had gone uncertain, like a man who'd told a joke in a room where half the crowd didn't laugh. "Cody," I said. That's all I said. Just his name. And that is when the door opened. I didn't see her come in at first because I wasn't looking at the door. I was looking at my son. But the room shifted, that thing that happens when someone enters who changes the pressure of a place, and I turned, and there was a woman standing inside the doorway in a gray travel coat, a rolling suitcase still in her hand, like she'd come straight from somewhere without stopping. My sister Beverly. Beverly is 63 years old and she lives in Portland, Oregon, and I had not seen her in 2 years. I knew she'd been going through her own troubles, a divorce, a move, a hard year that she'd mostly kept from me because she didn't want to add to my grief. We talked on the phone. We texted. But she was not someone I had expected to see standing in the banquet room of the Riverside Grill on a Friday night. She looked at me first, just for a second, long enough to take in the suit, the new shoes, the way I was standing. Then, she looked at the screen, which still had that last slide on it. Then she looked at Cody. I have known Beverly my whole life. I know the full range of her expressions, from the kind of laughter that doubles her over to the kind of anger that goes very, very still. What was on her face right now was the still kind. She walked to the center of the room slowly, setting her suitcase upright beside an empty chair. She took off her coat and draped it over the back. She did all of this without hurrying. When she finally spoke, her voice was conversational, which somehow made it worse. "Is this still going?" she said, gesturing toward the screen. "Or are we done?" Clifton straightened. "I'm sorry. Who are?" "I'm Gerald's sister," Beverly said. "I flew from Portland this morning. I've been traveling since 5 a.m., and I came straight from the airport, And I would really like someone to get my brother a real drink and take that off the screen. She tilted her head slightly toward the slideshow. Because that last one isn't a joke. That's a photograph of a grieving man sitting alone in his yard, and you put a caption on it and showed it at his retirement party. And I need someone in this room to explain to me how that is something we are all laughing at. The room was silent in a way I had never felt before in a public space. Marcus reached over and clicked the screen off. Renee said, very quietly, "Beverly, we were just—" "I know what you were doing," Beverly said. Still conversational. Still slow. "Cody," she turned to my son, "your father spent 38 years making sure you had everything you needed. I was there when your mother was sick and your dad worked doubles to keep the insurance. I was there when you needed money for your first semester and he sold the truck he'd had for 12 years without telling you what he gave up. I've watched this man hold your family together with both hands for 40 years. She paused. And you thought this was a fun way to spend his retirement dinner?" Cody's face had changed. The easy confidence was gone. He looked, for a moment, like the boy he used to be, the one who cried when his dog died. The one who called me from college when he failed his first exam and couldn't stop apologizing for letting me down. I saw that boy underneath the blazer and the uncertainty, and it broke something open in me, even in the middle of everything. "I didn't," Cody started. "The slide was Clifton's idea," Renee said. "I don't think she meant it to land the way it landed." Clifton looked at her sharply. Beverly didn't pursue it. She wasn't interested in who started it. She pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, not at the far end, but right next to me, and she looked up at the room full of people who were all very carefully not making eye contact with each other. "Somebody bring him his dinner," she said. "He's been standing through all of this and he hasn't eaten." It sounds like such a small thing. But friends, I cannot tell you what it meant to hear someone say that. He hasn't eaten. Like I mattered. Like the most basic fact of my comfort in that moment was worth saying out loud. Ray got up and flagged down a server. The party didn't recover exactly, but it changed. Clifton and Diane left within the hour, which they covered with the excuse of a long drive. Marcus and his wife followed shortly after. The remaining guests, Ray, Dorothy, and Frank, a few of my old coworkers, a neighbor I hadn't expected to see, stayed, and without the other contingent, something loosened. Real stories got told. Ray brought up the belt system story again, and this time it had all its details. Dorothy told Beverly about Patricia's garden, and Beverly took my hand under the table and held it without saying anything. Cody stayed. He stayed until almost everyone else had gone, and then he came and sat down across from Beverly and me, and he didn't try to explain or justify. He just sat there looking at the tablecloth. After a while, he said, "I knew it wasn't right. I kept telling myself it was funny. I let myself believe that because it was easier than making it a fight." "With who?" Beverly asked. He looked up. "Renee, her dad." Beverly nodded, like that confirmed something. She didn't press him. I told him I wasn't angry, which was true, and also not entirely true. I was angry, but anger wasn't the biggest thing I felt. The biggest thing I felt was tired and sad, and also, underneath all of that, something I hadn't expected. I felt grateful that Beverly had come. I felt grateful that Ray had gotten me my dinner. I felt grateful that Dorothy had given me a card with a handwritten note inside that I was going to read again when I got home. I told myself to hold on to those things instead of the other things, because a man who is 65 and has already lost his wife cannot afford to spend too much time on the other things. But Cody and I did not hug that night. We shook hands at the door, which is not something we'd ever done before, and I drove home alone. Beverly stayed with me for 4 days. She slept in the guest room and drank my coffee and sat with me on the back porch in the evenings, and we talked about Patricia, which we'd never done enough of because we'd both been trying so hard not to make each other cry. She told me she'd bought the plane ticket 3 weeks before the party when Cody had called to tell her about it. She said she'd had a feeling, nothing specific, just something in the way he described it that made her uneasy. She'd saved for months because the flight wasn't cheap, and she'd called in a favor at work to get the time off. She said she almost didn't come. She said she'd talked herself out of it twice in the week before. I asked her what made her get on the plane. She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "I remembered when you came to Portland after my divorce. You didn't call first." And you just showed up at my door with a bag from that Thai place I used to like, and you sat with me for 3 days and you didn't try to fix anything. You were just there. She looked out at Patricia's garden. I figured I owed you a trip. I had to look away from her for a minute after that. On the second day, Cody called. Not to me, to Beverly first, which I thought was cowardly at the time but later understood. He needed a bridge. It out. Beverly told him to call me directly and say what he actually meant, not what he thought he should say. He called me that afternoon, and he was on the phone for 45 minutes, which is longer than Cody has ever stayed on a phone call with me in his adult life. He talked about Renee's family, about the pressure of belonging to a world that wasn't his original world, about how he'd let that pressure make him smaller in ways he hadn't noticed until Beverly said his name in that room, and he saw himself clearly for the first time in years. He said, I think I've been ashamed of where I came from, and I took that out on you. And I am so sorry, Dad. Friends, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't fine. I didn't tell him to forget it, because I couldn't forget it yet. 35725. What I told him was that I loved him. I told him that was not something that changed. And I told him that if he wanted to rebuild something, I was willing to try, but it had to be done honestly, and it had to be done slowly, and it had to be done by him, not by Renee, not by her family, not by anyone else standing in for him. He said, I know. He said, I'll be there. He came 2 weeks later. Not Renee, just Cody. He drove up from Columbus on a Saturday morning and he brought coffee from the place I like, and he came out to the back porch and we sat there in the quiet for a long time without saying anything, the way men sometimes do when there's too much to say and no good order to say it in. After a while, he asked about Patricia's garden. I told him what was growing, what had died over the winter, what I'd planted new in the spring because I thought she would have liked it. He listened. He asked questions I hadn't expected him to know to ask. And I realized, sitting there with him, that this person in front of me, this man who had made a serious mistake, who was sitting with the weight of it without trying to make it lighter, this was still my son. The boy who cried for his dog. The boy who called from college. That doesn't erase what happened. I want to be honest about that. You don't take a photograph of a grieving man in his own yard, put a caption on it, and put it on a screen in front of 30 people, and then have everything be fine 2 weeks later. There are things that take time. There are things that have to be rebuilt plank by plank, and some of the planks will be warped and the fit won't be perfect, and you have to decide if the house is still worth building. I have decided it is. Beverly flew home on the 5th day. I drove her to the airport, and at the curb I held her for a long time, which is something we never used to do. We were not a family that lingered at goodbyes. She had a bruise on her shoulder from the seatbelt on the flight over. She had bags under her eyes from 4 days of not sleeping well in an unfamiliar bed. She looked, to me, like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I told her I was sorry it had taken something like this for us to spend 4 real days together. She said, then let's not wait for something next time. I'm standing on my back porch now, writing this. It's a Tuesday evening in late spring, and the light does that thing it does this time of year where it turns the whole yard gold for about 20 minutes before it's gone. Patricia's peonies are coming back, they always do, even when I forget to tend them properly. The garden is stubborn, the way she was stubborn. I retired from Hargrove Steel after 38 years. I have calloused hands and a bad knee and a pension that's enough if I'm careful. I have a son who is trying, which is not the same as a son who has arrived, but it is something real and it is something I choose to hold on to. I have a sister who got on a plane because she remembered a bag of Thai food from years ago. And I have a back porch. I used to hate that photo, the one they put on the screen. I hated that someone had taken it without asking, that they'd used my loneliness as a punchline. 3. But I've thought about it a lot since, and you know what I think? I think whoever took it accidentally captured something true. That man, sitting in his yard, shoulders curved, looking at the garden, he was wondering where some things went. He was sitting with his grief, quiet and alone in the evening light. But that is not the same as being lost. And if you are out there tonight, if you are a father, a grandfather, a man or woman who has given years of your life to your family and your work and the quiet duties that nobody puts on a slideshow, I want you to know something. Your worth is not measured by who shows up to celebrate you. It is not measured by the room or the tablecloths or the speeches. It is measured in the calluses on your hands. End quote. End quote. In the seeds you put in the ground each spring. In the people who get on a plane without telling you first. The best part of my retirement has not been the party. It has been the back porch in the evenings, with the peonies coming back and my phone ringing on Saturdays and knowing that the door is open and someone is learning to walk through it. That is enough. That is more than enough.